Hello, my name is Kai Guo from the University of Tokyo, and our presentation title is Glossary Perception in VR at Long View Distance, the effect of binocular highlight intensity asymmetry. Let me start with the background. When light hits an object surface and undergoes specular reflection into the observer's eye, the observer perceives a bright white region on the surface. This is called a reflection highlight or specular highlight. Our brain recognizes this highlight and performs complex cognitive processing, which is integrating features such as the highlight contrast, the sharpness, size, and other visual properties to form the perception of glass. So the key point here is that glass is a perceptual contrast, not a single physical quantity. It depends on many factors such like the view geometry and the illumination environment rather than any single measurable physical parameter. So how exactly do we perceive about the glossary? There are broadly two categories of cues. The first one is the monocular cues, in which the information available even from a single view. These include the highlight contrast, the highlight sharpness, and the size, and also including the illumination static and the highlight motion. And as you can see from this picture on the right side, the glossary appearance of the Stanford Burney is clearly perceivable even with the one eye. And the second cue is binocular cues, with information that arise when viewing with the both eyes. Because of the interpupillary distance, the left and right eyes see slightly different highlight information in this case. So currently, there are some issues with glossary perception in VR. The previous research has shown that resolution loss degrade highlight sharpness, and that binocular highlight disparity becomes less perceptible at a long view distance. This finding have led to a common assumption: perceived glass attenuates with view distance in VR. However, this has never been directly validated. And there is another important question: if this attenuation does exist, how do we compensate for it? This is another core motivation of our study. For this issue, we focus our attention on a phenomenon called binocular luster. When there is an interocular difference in illuminance or intensity, it could produce a distinctive glossary appearance. This led us to ask, could binocular luster serve as a compensatory mechanism? If glossary does attenuate for distance in VR, perhaps including binocular luster could help maintain or enhance the glossary perception. We consider three types of interocular difference. The first is a color difference between each eye. However, this is include strong binocular rivalry and is difficult in practice applications. Second is the shifting highlight position between the different eyes, but at a far distance, a very large offset is needed to produce a meaningful effect, which would destroy the natural highlight structure of the material. Therefore, we adopt the luminance difference, especially an interocular difference in specular intensity. This is close to original concept of binocular luster, and from an application perspective, it introduces minimal perspectual artifact. Based on this background, we formulated three research questions. AQ1 is how does view distance affect perceived glass in VR? AQ2 is how does manipulating binocular specular skin asymmetry affect perceived glass? AQ3 is does introducing physically inaccurate binocular asymmetry affect perceived realism? We conducted an experiment to verify these AQs. To address AQ1, we set view distance at 5 levels from 0.6 to 20.6 meters. This range covers conditions where binocular highlight disparity is clearly perceptible at the near distance and become negligible at the far distance. To address AQ2 and AQ3, we manipulate binocular highlight intensity asymmetry, which we define it as BHIA at 4 levels. Specifically, we introduce a scalar alpha into the specular term of the BRDF model, allowing independent control of specular intensity for each eye. The dominant eye always receives for specular intensity, which alpha equal to 1. The non-dominant eye's alpha varies from 0 to 1. As you can see in the figure, as alpha decreases, the specular component diminish. When delta alpha equals 0, both eye receive same image. This is the physically correct condition. Additionally, we include two highlight motion conditions, the static condition and the other is dynamic condition, where the object rotates at 36 degrees per second. Let me describe the stimulus and the measurement method. For the stimulus, we use the Stanford Burnham model rendered with a Coke tolerance BRDF in Unity. We set metallic to 0 and smoothness to 0.65, producing a non-metallic but clearly glossary appearance. The scene used a single D65 directional light, and the headset was MetaQuest 3. We collected two measure per trail. Q1 evaluated perceived gloss, used a magnitude estimation. Participants rate the test stimulus on a scale from 1 to 200 relative to the baseline. Q2 evaluated perceived gloss realism on a 9-point Likert scale, where 1 indicates very unnatural and 9 indicates consistent with the natural observation. Let me explain the procedure. Each trail begins with 5-second baseline presentation, the physically correct condition at 0.6 meters, followed by 10 seconds of test stimulus observation, and then the rating phase. We organized 40 trails into one block, 2 blocks in total, yielding 80 trails per participant. Trial was randomized and counterbalanced across participants. We recruited 20 participants, collecting a total of 1,600 data points. The next is the result of glass perception under the static highlight. There are 3 key findings. First, there's no reliable decline in perceived gloss with distance, which is contradicting with the common assumption. We attribute this is to Quest 3's resolution keeping highlights above the sampling limit and micro moments producing temporal specular that maintain perceived contrast at the far distance. Second, at 20.6 meter, we noticed the physically correct readings showed the highest gloss. However, maximum asymmetry is the lowest one. This is because the large interocular intensity difference reduces the perceived highlight brightness during the binocular fusion. Third, in the mid-range, no clear separation among delta alpha level is observed, suggesting the glossary perception depends more on the monocular cues than the binocular cues. Next is the result under dynamic highlights. Overall, perceived gloss is above baseline across all delta alpha levels, confirming that highlight motion enhances glossary perception. Notably, gloss does not peak at the nearest distance, but around 5.6 meters, forming an inverted U pattern. We interpret this as at close distance, the object subtends a large visual angle, making it harder to efficiently extract the temporal information. Beyond 5.6 meter, gloss declines with the distance. This is likely because at the far distance, fewer screen pixels represent highlight motion, reducing the reliability of temporal varying cues. Let me present the result of perceived glass realism. The left panel shows static, the right panel shows dynamic. First, unlike glass intensity, realism systematically declines with distance. Participants attribute this mainly to distance-dependent pixelation and highlight instability, suggesting the realism is more sensitive to fidelity limitation than glossary intensity. Regarding the BHIA, only delta alpha equals 1 show reliably lower realism. The other three levels are mutually indistinguishable. This suggests pixel level binocular matching may not be necessary. To wrap up, here are our three main takeaways and future directions. Please allow me to leave this on screen for your reference. Thank you for your listening.